Okay, ready for this? Today we're diving deep into the afterlife.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Big topic.
You said it. You all really outdid yourself sending in so many interesting sources this time. Wikipedia, ancient texts, even some scientific studies on near-death experiences.
It's a question that's fascinated people for as long as we've been around, right? What
Yeah.
happens after we die?
Totally. And I got to say, looking at all these sources, it's clear it's not just about heaven and hell. I mean, there are so many different ideas out there.
Right. You got everything from reincarnation to celestial realms, philosophical theories. It's amazing. Definitely more than a simple heaven or hell
Yeah,
scenario.
exactly. So where do you even begin with a topic this massive?
Well, I thought we could start with one of the most persistent ideas about the afterlife, reincarnation.
Oh, good one. Yeah. The idea that the soul is reborn into a new physical form after death.
Exactly. And it's not just one culture or time period. This belief pops up all over the place throughout history.
Oh, totally. You
Yeah.
see it in Hinduism, Jainism, even some branches of Judaism and Christianity.
Right. It really makes you wonder why this idea of the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes is so universal.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, even ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Pythagoras, they were into reincarnation.
They saw it as this process of the soul learning and evolving over many lifetimes, right?
Right, like we keep coming back to learn from our mistakes, grow, and try to achieve some kind of enlightenment.
Yeah, it's almost like this hopeful idea that we have multiple chances to get things right, to become better versions of ourselves.
Okay, that's actually a really comforting way to think about it.
And, it also changes how you look at challenges in life. Like maybe setbacks and failures aren't punishments, but opportunities for growth and learning in this grand cycle of existence.
I like that. Instead of just a straight line from birth to death, it's this cyclical journey, right? The soul constantly evolving and transforming.
Exactly. But not all cultures believe in this ongoing cycle. Some traditions have more of a destination in mind for the afterlife.
Right. Specific realms or destinations that souls go to after they die. And boy, do we have some wild ones in these sources. Summerlin, Valhalla, talk about a travel brochure for the afterlife.
Don't forget the Greek underworld.
Oh man, how could I forget the underworld? That's a whole epic adventure in itself. Rivers of fire, fields of mourning, and don't even get me started on Tartarus. Virgil's Aeneid really went all out describing that place.
It definitely wasn't intended to be a relaxing afterlife experience, but, the underworld, even with all its scary stuff, tells us a lot about Greek culture.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, for one thing, it shows how much they valued living a good, virtuous life. Like, they believed your actions while you were alive, good or bad, directly affected what happened to you after you died.
Interesting. So good people got rewarded and bad people, well, not so much.
Pretty much. Heroes got to hang out in the Elysian fields, which sounds kind of nice, actually. But if you were wicked, eternal punishment. So it wasn't just about where you ended up, but how you lived your life that really mattered.
Wow, so the underworld was like a reflection of their values and beliefs.
Yeah. It was a powerful reminder of their worldview. Now, the Greeks weren't the only ones with strong ideas about the afterlife. The Abrahamic religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they also have these vivid descriptions of what happens after we die.
Right, and for them, it's usually about a final judgment, right?
Mm.
And then you're either sent to heaven or hell for eternity. Although, it doesn't seem quite that simple, does it?
You're right, it's definitely more complex than that. For example, in Catholicism, there's this whole concept of purgatory.
Purgatory, right. That's
Yeah.
like a waiting room for the afterlife, isn't it?
You could say that. It's considered a temporary state of purification after death. You're not in heaven, but you're not condemned to hell either. And a similar idea pops up in Zoroastrianism, where there's a place for the mixed ones, where souls are judged and purified before they can move on to their final destination.
Okay, so it's not a case of you're in or you're out.
Yeah.
There's this whole in-between area where things are decided.
Exactly. And what I find fascinating is that even with all these different interpretations, those core questions remain the same. Is there life after death? Are we judged for how we lived? Is there redemption? These questions are at the heart of so many belief systems, even today.
Absolutely. But it's not just philosophers and theologians who've tried to tackle this mystery, right?
Mm.
Scientists have also taken a crack at trying to understand what happens after we die.
Right. And that brings us to some, well, let's just say interesting attempts to actually measure the soul.
You're talking about that experiment where a doctor tried to weigh people's souls as they died.
That's the one, the 21 grams experiment. Now, it was pretty flawed. But you gotta admit, the idea of trying to apply scientific methods to something like the soul is pretty wild.
Yeah, talk about a clash of science and spirituality, trying to weigh something that's supposed to be immaterial.
It's tricky, but even if we can't literally measure a soul, there are scientists today studying near-death experiences, or NDEs, to try and understand the experience of death itself.
Right. NDEs, those accounts from people who are clinically dead, like their heart stopped and then they were resuscitated, their stories are often so similar, even across different cultures.
Exactly. They talk about this overwhelming feeling of peace, out-of-body sensations, sometimes even seeing loved ones who already passed on.
Yeah, and there was that one study, the AWARE study, right, where a bunch of cardiac arrest survivors reported having some kind of awareness even while they were technically dead.
It really makes you think about consciousness, right? Like, if the brain is supposed to be offline, how are they experiencing anything at all?
I know. It's like their consciousness, whatever that might be, was operating independently of their physical bodies.
Yeah,
That's where things start to get really deep and philosophical, don't they?
they certainly do. And luckily, we have even more sources that delve into those very questions.
Perfect. Let's take a look, but first, a quick break. We'll be right back to continue our exploration of the afterlife. Okay, so we've gone from ancient reincarnation beliefs to scientists trying to weigh souls. Talk about a wild ride.
It's amazing how many different ways people have tried to understand what happens after death. And, it gets even more complex when you start looking at how philosophers have tackled this question.
Oh, absolutely. And luckily, we've got some sources that take us right into those philosophical debates.
Mm-hmm.
One idea that really caught my eye was this concept of objective immortality from process philosophy.
Ah, yes, process philosophy. It's a fascinating perspective. So instead of talking about a soul that survives death, process philosophy says that our experiences, they kind of live on as part of a larger universal consciousness.
Okay, so it's not like we continue on as individuals, but the things we did, the things we felt, those become part of something bigger than ourselves.
Right. It's like every action, every thought creates a ripple effect. And those ripples, they don't just disappear. They become part of the universe's ongoing story long after we're gone.
So even the little things matter, the small acts of kindness, the fleeting thoughts, they all contribute to this bigger picture.
In a way, yes. And it really makes you think about legacy in a different light. It's not just about what we achieve in our lifetimes, but about how we touch the lives of others, how our actions shape the world around us, even in subtle ways.
Wow, that's actually really profound. It's like even if we don't leave behind some grand legacy, our lives still have meaning and impact that extends far beyond ourselves.
Exactly. And that interconnectedness is a key part of process philosophy. Our experiences are intertwined with the experiences of everything else in the universe. It's a pretty mind-blowing concept when you think about it.
It is. Okay, but get ready for this next one because this one really messed with my head. One of our listeners sent in this thought experiment about a perfect replica of yourself existing somewhere else in the universe. Would that replica actually be you or just a copy with all your memories and experiences?
Ah, the classic question of personal identity. It's something philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. If you could create a being that was identical to you, physically, mentally, emotionally, would that really be the same as you continuing to exist?
It's kind of terrifying, right?
Hey.
Like, what makes you you? Is it your body, your memories, your consciousness? If you swapped places with that replica, would anyone even know the difference? Would you know the difference?
Exactly. It makes you question what it even means to be you. And whether there's something like a soul that's separate from our physical form, or if consciousness is more like a product of the brain, something that could theoretically be recreated.
Mind-blowing stuff. It's like, how can we even begin to understand what survives after death when we're still trying to figure out what it means to be alive and conscious in the first place?
It's a huge question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. But these thought experiments, they force us to confront these big mysteries head on. They push us to think about the nature of reality, the self, and what it means to exist.
I need a minute to process all of that. But before we get too lost in these existential questions, there's one more source I want to mention because it really resonated with me. It's a talk by Rabbi Simon Jacobson, and he uses this really cool analogy to explain how our limited perception might be affecting how we think about the afterlife.
An analogy? I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So he asks his listeners to imagine a refrigerator, and then he asks, where does the electricity go when you unplug the refrigerator?
Interesting question. I mean, most people don't really think about where electricity goes when they're not using it.
Exactly. And his point is, the electricity doesn't actually go anywhere. It's still there. It just returns to this larger power grid, which is something the refrigerator with its limited wiring and functionality can't even begin to comprehend.
Ah, I see where he's going with this. The refrigerator is like us, humans, with our limited perception of reality.
Right. He's saying our senses, our intellect, even our emotions, they're like that refrigerator's wiring. They limit what we're able to experience and understand. So just like the refrigerator can't perceive the vastness of the power grid, we might not be equipped to understand what happens after death or even the true nature of consciousness.
That's a powerful analogy. It suggests that the afterlife, or even consciousness itself, might exist on a completely different plane of reality, one that our current instruments just aren't designed to understand.
It's like trying to browse the internet using a rotary phone. The technology just isn't there yet, and maybe we're not quite there yet when it comes to understanding what happens after we die.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it, to consider that we might only be scratching the surface of reality as we know it, and that maybe there's so much more out there beyond the reach of our current understanding.
It's both exciting and terrifying at the same time. But you know what I find comforting about Rabbi Jacobson's analogy?
What's that?
It suggests that even though we're unplugged from this life, so to speak, when we die, we're not just disappearing into nothingness. We're returning to something larger than ourselves, something we can't fully grasp, but something that's always been there.
It's a message of hope and interconnectedness, and it reminds us that death, even though it's this huge transition, might not be the end in the way we often think about it.
Exactly. So we've covered some serious ground here. Ancient beliefs about reincarnation, all those different afterlives, even those scientists trying to measure souls.
And those philosophers, don't forget about them, trying to wrap their heads around consciousness and what it all means.
It's mind-boggling. But going through all these sources, I'm realizing maybe it's less about finding one right answer about the afterlife and more about, the journey itself, all the different ideas, the searching, the questioning. It opens up your mind to possibilities you never even considered.
Totally. Just wrestling with these big questions, even if there's no easy answer, it makes you think differently. And honestly, I think it can make you appreciate life more too.
I agree. It's like this whole other level of meaning opens up. And speaking of meaning, remember that Rabbi Jacobson analogy with the refrigerator and the
Oh,
electricity?
yeah. How could I forget that one?
Well, he actually connects that idea to the concept of legacy. Like, even if we don't know exactly what happens to us after we die, our impact on other people, the way we touch their lives, it doesn't just disappear.
It's like a ripple effect, right? The things we do, the way we treat each other, it keeps resonating even after we're gone.
Exactly. It's not just about money or achievements. It's about those intangible things. The love, the kindness, even just a kind word to someone who needs it. Those things have a lasting impact. It's almost like this web of connections, where our actions keep weaving themselves into the world long after we're gone.
It's a beautiful way to think about it. We all have the power to leave something positive behind, to make a difference in the world that outlasts our physical lives.
That's a powerful. And it's a message that resonates across so many of these different beliefs, right? That the way we live our lives matters.
Absolutely. So maybe instead of getting hung up on finding the right answer about the afterlife, we can focus on living in a way that creates a positive ripple effect.
I like that. Focus on the legacy we're creating right now. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave everyone with one final thought. If our impact on others is a way of living on, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? What kind of ripple effect will you create in the world?
It's a question worth pondering, and hopefully this exploration has given everyone some food for thought as they continue their own journeys.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep those minds open and keep on diving deep.